Welcome to the backup section, probably the most important section that you should be paying attention to. Now, with shooting tethered, things change in terms of how and where your files are being backed up. The nice thing about shooting just to a camera, in its simplicity, is that a lot of cameras today have a CF card slot and an SD card slot, or even two CF card slots. So this means that you can actually choose to have all of your files backed up in two locations in your camera, which is nice. Now that we're shooting tethered, a lot of camera systems actually do not allow you to write to your CF card and to your computer's hard drive at the same time, which then puts the onus on you to come up with a second location almost in real time to put those files. Now keep in mind, if you're shooting for a client, there's absolutely no exception to, I lost the files, I didn't have a second location. So what we want to cover today are some of the options that you should put into place that fits your workflow for having a backup solution in place. What I'd like to cover now are some of the options that you have, and also the terminology of RAID, RAID 1, RAID 0, RAID 5, read-write speeds, and how all of this fits into your workflow. So the first drive that I want to start with is the drive inside of your computer. This is probably going to be the most important thing to consider when picking a computer. Now, traditionally, we've all had the hard disk drives either at 5400 RPM or 7200 RPM. Now, the hard disk drives are becoming less and less available in newer MacBooks and newer PCs, and we tend to see the industry going towards solid state drives as that is becoming more and more affordable. So what does this mean? So the hard disk drives in your computer are actually quite a bit slower read-write speeds. So this means if you're shooting to a computer with, let's say, a 5400 RPM drive, the files themselves are actually going to write onto your computer's hard drive slower, which means that you're going to be able to shoot not as quickly as you could if you were shooting to a solid state drive. So that is a big thing to consider, and I would definitely recommend shooting to a solid state drive as the first destination for your files and shooting tethered. One other thing to consider with solid state drives is that they are not as big as the hard disk drives that are available. You know, it's really easy to get a 1 or 2 terabyte hard disk drive for pretty cheap, but on the flip side, a 1 terabyte solid state drive in your computer is quite a bit expensive. Yes, it's fast, yes, it's ideal, but you're going to spend quite a bit more money on that internal solid state drive if it's 1 terabyte. Now, if you're going to be shooting a lot of files in a day, you want to have at least a 512 gigabyte solid state drive to shoot to. And another rule of thumb is that you always want to have it 30 to 40% free. So that means you do not want to go over data that fills up your hard drive 60 to 70% full, because you will see your system start to bog down both on a PC or a Mac. So ideally, when you're shooting to your computer, you do want to shoot internally to your solid state drive or your hard disk drive in the computer for your file's first destinations where they will live. This will give you the optimal viewing experience and the optimal experience in terms of how quickly those files are going to render on your computer's monitor for speed. So once we're shooting to our internal drive, we then want to create a copy onto an external drive. Now, Apple's made it a lot harder to customize your computer in terms of a second hard drive, but there are options with PCs. So if you're going to get a PC, technically you can get a PC and customize it with a second internal drive in the computer itself if you want to really keep it simple and minimize the amount of things that are plugged into your computer. It's a lot harder to do this with Apple today. So having said that, we have other solutions for you to back up your files to either manually or with an automated process through software like Carbon Copy Cloner. So everything you see in front of me is actually made by a company called G Technology or G Drive. We've been using G Drive for a number of years, and we really can depend on their quality, their build, their durability, and the amount of options that we have that fit our custom workflow, both for in-studio with power and out on location. Where I'd like to start now is with our mobile solutions. These are often referred to as shuttles or mobiles. The first one is a 1 terabyte G drive. This is called the EV RAW. So a drive like this is going to be where a lot of you might want to start. It's very affordable. There's a lot of space on it. It's 1 terabyte. So as you're shooting to your internal drive, you can use software like Carbon Copy Cloner, or there's a lot of options on the market to copy data to. And that will then copy data from your source location, which is your computer's drive, and automatically make a mirror copy of that onto a drive like this that is at your mobile workstation. So then you have 2 copies of the data on location itself. So when you leave location, you can separate those copies. You can send one with a producer, one with a client, and have that data in 2 locations at all times. So this is a really good solution. This one itself is USB 3. So the connection itself here is going to be USB 3 only. But the nice thing about this drive itself is that you can get a case for it that also adds the addition of Thunderbolt and a little more protection, which is what's next to it right here. So this one is the G Drive EV ATC. And essentially this is a case itself that has a Thunderbolt cable built into it, and the case itself is waterproof. So it's shockproof, it's waterproof. It will allow you to take a drive like this, put it in a case like that, and let's say you're going somewhere where there might be water, or you just need that added layer of protection and maybe a little bit of a faster speed for read-write or transfer with Thunderbolt. Now, it's easily detachable here. It opens up so you can easily take it out, put it back in, and have a whole family of these live in a case just like this. Now, these drives also come in solid state options. You are gonna see quite a bit of a price increase if you go to solid state, but if speed is something that you're worried about out on location and you need to copy your files pretty quickly, solid state is absolutely ideal, but you are gonna pay quite a bit more for solid state options. And one last thing to note on the mobile drives is that there's no backup in them, meaning that all of the data on that drive, if let's say that drive failed, is going to be lost. So there's no backup built into this. Now from there, we can go to another option that is very similar to this in terms of there's no backup built into it. And this is a 4 terabyte G drive with options for both Thunderbolt and USB 3 on the back. But with a drive like this, you have to have access to power. Now, what's the difference between this one and this one? Obviously, power is gonna slow you down. But with a drive like this, you're gonna actually have faster read-write speeds. So if copying data to another location is something you need to do quickly, a drive like this is going to be a faster read-write option for transfer speeds. Still very affordable, and you can get sizes quite a bit bigger than the 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte options on the smaller shuttles. So from here, we're gonna go into a drive that has additional options both for backup or speed. And that is commonly referred to as RAID. RAID itself is an acronym for a redundant array of independent disks, which means that anytime you see the word RAID, the enclosure itself is gonna have at least 2 or more drives. In this situation, we have a 16 terabyte drive itself, and it has options for RAID 0 or RAID 1. Now, we have this formatted as RAID 0, so that means we have 16 total terabytes available to write to and to read from, to store all your data on. And it actually is separating your data and writing both of your data on 2 disks at the same time, which is kind of scary when you think about it. All your photos or your videos are both being written to disk A and B at the same time. So what this means though is that there is 0 backup built into this drive at RAID 0. So RAID 0, 0 backup. But you're gonna have a much bigger increase in speed because it uses 2 drives and it's able to write to both of those drives at the same time and not get bogged down with just writing to 1 drive. So from RAID 0, we're gonna go to a RAID 1 example. Now we use this drive as RAID 1, and this drive itself has 2 drives. It's a little bit smaller than this one. It's a total drive of 8 terabytes. So both of these are then 4 terabyte drives. Since we have it formatted to RAID 1, we actually only get 50% of the total capacity, which means that this 8 terabyte drive will only show up as a 4 terabyte drive. But there's an added layer of security built into this drive at RAID 1. It's actually going to copy all of your data onto drive A and then make a copy of that data onto drive B. So let's say we're traveling and a PA drops the drive, or something happens and one of the drive fails. Well, we have all of the other data on drive B. So there's an added layer of security built into this. The only downside is, let's say somebody steals your drive. Well, then it didn't matter if you had it backed up because you had all of your data in one location. So there's definitely some benefits to RAID 0. There's also some benefits to RAID 1. So again, with RAID 0, we have no redundancy, but we are blazing fast with speed. It's the fastest speeds that we can get out of the drive. With RAID 1, we have redundancy built in, but it's actually going to take a big nosedive in terms of our speed. So it's going to take a lot longer for you to write your data from your computer to a drive like this. So from here, there are a few other options in terms of how you duplicate your data if making copies is something that is really critical to your workflow. That's where the GDoc comes in. This is more of a manual backup that you can make on multiple smaller shuttle drives. So let's say you're shooting a lot of data onto smaller drives such as these. These can be put in here and you can have multiple drives in the GDoc and it will actually create copies for you. So if you need to create a lot of copies for clients, or just you want to have a lot of copies in multiple locations for peace of mind if a job is mission critically important, the GDoc itself is a great solution. The only caveat to this is that you are going to need access to power. So a solution like this is not going to be something you want to bring with you if you're going to be in the middle of the woods and you need to make a copy. You're going to need to use software through your computer to make multiple copies onto a drive like this, if that is going to be in your workflow. So from here, we're going to jump into our much more advanced solutions that are commonly used for archiving. With these, you have the options for both RAID 0, which is absolute speed and no redundancy. You also have the option for RAID 1, which is 50% of the capacity, but a lot of redundancy built in. Or you have additional options for something that we use called RAID 5. RAID 5 is actually the best of both worlds. We have built-in speed, but we don't take a huge hit when we use our redundancy. So basically with RAID 5, you need a minimum of 3 drives. You're not going to find any solutions out there that have 3 drives in them. You're normally going to see a RAID 5 solution start at 4 drives. In this example, we have 8 drives. So with RAID 5, it's basically writing all of your data, all your photos, and all the ones and zeros of that photo onto all the drives itself. And what that means is any one of these drives can fail. So if that drive fails, there is enough data on the rest of the drives to actually put in a new drive, and then it will rebuild all of that data on that drive itself. So we have the ability for one of these drives, any of these drives can fail. But what happens when you do a RAID 5, you are still taking a little bit of a hit on capacity. So in this solution, we've turned the 64 terabyte drive into RAID 5, and actually only 56 terabytes are going to be available. So on our computer, it's not going to show up as a 64 terabyte drive, even though that there's 64 terabytes here. It's going to show up as 56 total terabytes available because it's using one of these drives, actually all of these drives, as the backup. An additional option, if you want to have an added layer of security, is to format something like this as RAID 6. RAID 6 is very similar to RAID 5, however, it's going to allow you to lose the total of 2 drives. So any 2 drives in here can fail. And there's enough data on the rest of the drives to be able to lose 2 drives. And the nice thing about this enclosure itself is that it's hot swappable, meaning that the drive can be on and let's say you get an indicator saying 1 or 2 of the drives have failed. Well, you can take those out just by pushing this button. Those drives will pop out, and you can then literally put in 2 new drives, and there's going to be enough data inside of this enclosure on the rest of the working drives for it to then rebuild and send that data to the other drives itself. It's absolutely magic, and it absolutely is a lifesaver if backing up your data and having your data safe is mission critical. From here we have our newest drive that we're using out on location, and that is the Shuttle XL. It has a lot of the same features like RAID 5, RAID 0, RAID 1 as this one. It has huge capacity, but one thing you'll notice down here on the bottom is the ability to actually plug in drives from our Atomos recorders. And that will allow you to then back up and put your drives directly into here to dump that data on. So that's just another feature on top of a much more rugged build that allows you to be much more mobile, but essentially it's going to be the same features. You're probably not going to use this in a shooting tethered scenario since you're shooting to your computer and then backing up to a drive. It's just another feature if you're doing a shoot that has both motion and photography built into it. This could be a good solution for you in that situation. So that is essentially an overview into how different drives and the features of those drives can fit into your workflow. Now, I will say that there are a lot of manufacturers out there, and there are always super cheap options on Amazon. One thing to consider though is that you usually get what you pay for, both with the drives, the connections of those drives themselves, the cables they come with. You don't want to be messing around and going cheap on your data storage because you do not want that to bite you in the ass. Now, one thing also to always keep in mind is that even though that these are high quality drives, we always view these as they're gonna fail today. So this is gonna fail today. What is my backup solution? Do we have this in another location? Do we have it in 2 locations? Do we have it in 2 separate locations and on the cloud? So despite these being incredibly well built, despite a lot of these being enterprise drives, they are always going to fail. It's similar to the tires on your car. It's not a matter of if you're gonna get a flat, it's when you're gonna get a flat. So you better have a spare tire in the back of your car.